This list is pretty much the comic book equivalent of it not being about how you start, but about how you finish. Woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. I want to do another more relaxed, discussion-based top 10 video, and I always think it's interesting when a writer has to take over a series. So I wanted to put together a list of 10 of my favourite examples of this happening, but it ended up being for the better. I don't know why I'm going to have to say this, but this is my personal opinion. I don't even have a set of rules, I really haven't taken it that seriously. And jumping in at number 10, I'm going to go with Garth Ennis' takeover of Hellblazer. Now he did issues 41 to 50, 52 to 83, and also issues 129 to 133. So he did dip in and out of this title a few times, and originally he took over from Jamie Delano. This was the guy who started this series, so there was very big shoes to fill, but I just think it's interesting how Garth Ennis managed to make this series his own. He also did the most development for the character, including storylines that revolved around his cancer, and I think it's interesting that even though Hellblazer is a series that you can easily jump into from issue 1, the Garth Ennis section of this, which happened a couple of years into its run, is the one that most people point to as a jumping on point. His run in particular even managed to get its own omnibus when the rest of the series just hasn't been collected yet. And if you want to pick that book up or any other omnibus, you can get them from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. Number 9, I'm going to go with Geoff Johns on JSA. Now admittedly, there's probably quite a lot of Geoff Johns titles that I could have included in this list, but the reason why I think his takeover of JSA is so impressive is because of the fact that this was being written by James Robinson before, and he pretty much saved the JSA because to the majority of the comic reading community, they were often just seen as the older version of the Justice League. Sure, yeah, there was still a lot of respect and love for them, but they weren't really the premier team that DC wanted. Geoff Johns jumped onto the title at issue 6 and was writing it alongside David S. Goyer until issue 51 when Johns became the primary writer. He then made this title his own, considering the big name that started this off and the one that was working alongside him. Everybody remembers this as Geoff Johns' JSA. So I think when you consider the brand recognition of the team, the people that were working on it early on, the fact that it still wasn't even his own title at the 50th issue, yet it still managed to become one of the best examples of storytelling that he's done in his entire career. Number 8, and you knew he was going to make it on this list at some point, but it's Fantastic Four by the man himself, Mark fucking Waid. Now, the 90s weren't too kind to the Fantastic Four, but during the time of Heroes Reborn, they were finally getting relaunched with their own series. Jim Lee was coming back to the title, everybody was very excited for it, but then that buzz quickly died off. Adam Warren wrote the title for a bit until issue 60 when Mark Waid entered. But in a decade where everything was about being gritty and radical and extreme, it looked like it still might be a tough sell. The Fantastic Four will always be Marvel's first family, and that's what Mark Waid put at the forefront of his run. And sure, yeah, I know a lot of people still love the Heroes Return stuff, but there's a reason that most people just recommend Mark Waid's stuff. He kept it simple, he brought it back to basics, he didn't really care about a lot of the other stuff that was going on in the Marvel universe. The fact that Mark Waid is the one that's remembered above all of those is just phenomenal. Number 7, I'm going to go with Greg Rucka when he took over Wonder Woman. Another writer that could have been included a couple times on this list, but the reason why I think this is so impressive is because he took over at issue 195 from none other than Walter Simonson. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about the fact that one of the most influential creators of Thor took over for Wonder Woman, but you do hear them talking about Greg Rucka. This is because he really managed to bring it back to a street level while still respecting her mythology. So you did get time with her in a city. There was also this storyline revolving around this scandal that was happening. Often it seems like Wonder Woman creators don't know whether they should focus on bringing her down to our level or just showing her for the goddess that she is. Greg Rucka really managed to balance that out, and especially considering some of the big names that led this title beforehand, the fact that his run is the one that we remember most when it was started by George Perez and then was taken over by William Messner-Loebs and was being written by Walter Simonson before this, it's so impressive that Greg Rucka managed to stand out amongst all of them. Number 6, I'm going to go with Joe Casey with WildCA.T.S. Now this was one of the first Wildstorm Vertigo, or it's technically Image comics that I ever read, because back in the day I was a massive fan of iFanboy, but then learning about the history of this book is the reason why it's on this list. So Joe Casey took over at issue 5, but this wasn't the original run of WildCA.T.S because this was a relaunch of the title title that was mostly remembered as being Jim Lee's project. The first 4 issues had been written by Scott Lobdell, and it never really looks great when a writer can't even stick around for a year, but Joe Casey took over and completely reinvented this title. It became this spy espionage thriller with this shady company that you could never really trust, and I just find the history of this comic so fascinating, which is why I wanted to do this list, because I do find the history of comics interesting. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get every fact on this video correct. I'm sure I'm going to get absolutely molested in the comments if I'm wrong, which is definitely the best part about being on YouTube. But honestly, because of how important this was to me when I was first getting into comics, I do hope that Joe Casey's Wildcats can get like this second wind and it can get some newer collected editions, because it is very out of print. Number 5, I'm gonna go with Gail Simone on Birds of Prey. She took over the book at issue 56 in 2003, but the title had been started by Chuck Dixon. If it was a Batman book, it was pretty much guaranteed to be written by him. But then over the years, he left a couple of those titles, and Birds of Prey started to fade in the middle, until Simone took over the title, and she really breathed in the fresh air that this book needed. It still wasn't the biggest selling title over at DC, but it began to get this cult following. It stuck true to its core, really focused on the characters, and I think this is some of the best work that's ever been done on Oracle. What I think speaks to the strength of her run is that years after this, she came back to the title when it had a relaunch, and everybody knew that this was the book that you needed to pick up. Number 4, and I think at this point I'm going to mention that these aren't really in any strict order, because a lot of you will think that this should be number 1, but I'm going to go with Alan Moore when he took over Swamp Thing. Now, full disclosure, I haven't finished reading all of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. I've read the vast majority of it, and I'm going to finish it for Halloween this year, but I can honestly say that I've read absolutely nothing of Swamp Thing that came before. He took over at issue number 20 in 1984, so this was before Watchmen and Killing Joke, and having started his work on V for Vendetta, he was really beginning to get a name for himself. But it'd be fun to place a bet on how many people who've either read or own Alan Moore's Swamp Thing can tell you who was writing the book before. I'll save you the Google search so that you can pretend that you knew it the entire time, because it's Martin Pasco. No disrespect to that guy, but you don't hear many people saying, oh, I wish we had an absolute edition of Pasco's Swamp Thing. What's more interesting is that this is the second series that Swamp Thing had after his original one in 1973. He was going for a darker tone, it was a pre-Vertigo comic, and it just looked like it was kind of living in the shadow of the series that came before it. Moore managed to rip it out of that shadow and turn it into its own thing, so much so that every Swamp Thing run that's come out after this is compared to it. It's also just impressive how this managed to stand the test of time and just what this did for Alan Moore's career. Number 3, and I know I'm going to get mauled for putting this higher than Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, but remember, I'm not really putting them in any strict order, because I'm going to go with Jeff Lemire on Green Arrow. Yeah, it's a book that I reviewed recently, so maybe I am a little bit biased, and I'm not saying that this is better than any of the other books that I've mentioned, but when you look at how harsh DC was during the New 52 era for just cancelling books, the fact that this managed to get released is amazing. Even some of the good books got cancelled before they had a 9th issue, so the fact that Green Arrow, that was being written by, I think it was J.T. Kroll before this, and it also got taken over by Ann Nocenti for a few issues, but it just looked like this was never really finding its feet. And as you might know if you've watched this channel before, the New 52 is my jam. Then issue 17 hit and Jeff Lemire took over with Andrea Sorrentino, and this saved this title. You might not like the Oliver Queen that's in this book, but you can't deny that this was the shot of adrenaline that this title needed. And even though the New 52 is seen in quite a poor light now, this is one of those runs that seems to stand out amongst the rest of them. So it managed to change the image of this series when it desperately needed it, and I just think it's impressive that it managed to stand out considering all the factors that it had against it. Number 2, I'm going to go with Chris Claremont on the Uncanny X-Men. Now yeah, this was actually the inspiration for this list, because I was thinking to myself what might have happened to the X-Men if he never jumped onto this title. He jumped onto the book at issue 94, and you might think that it's impressive that he managed to get to that number despite there being quite low sales, but the 30 or so issues that were before that were just reprints of earlier X-Men issues. So the X-Men were really in the toilet before this, but Chris Claremont managed to pull them out just before it flushed. They really did not know what to do with this team, and Claremont was the one that really managed to give them a lot of focus. Now sure, I know there was a lot of other creators that were as important to revitalizing the X-Men as Chris Claremont was, but the X-Men was not in a great state. It wasn't really held to the same level of acclaim as a lot of the other Stan Lee books. So the fact that Claremont, along with a lot of other people, managed to turn this ship around and make it into Marvel's flagship title is still something that's completely baffling to me. Some of the best X-Men stories of all time came out from his run, and even though I'm a bit of a casual fan when it comes to the mutant side of the Marvel universe, looking at the history of it, I can see just how important he is on this franchise and also to Marvel Comics as a whole. Number 1, and I'm definitely showing my bias here, because I'm going to go with Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis. I know a lot of people are not going to agree with me on this, but it's my opinion, but this was the first non-Ultimate Marvel book that I ever read, and it's the one that stuck with me the most. I didn't know that Bendis jumped into this nearly 20 issues in, or that it'd been started by Kevin Smith. But then when I started to learn about the history and just how hyped the title was when Kevin Smith started it, it's phenomenal that Bendis is the writer that we remember most from this series. He changed the way I looked at superheroes with this book, and it's still entertaining when I read it today. Honestly, just thinking about it now, I could go back and read it today, and there might be some books that I've put on this list that are more important than Daredevil by Bendis, and there's probably some that I've just missed off completely, so I'd really like to hear your list in the comments below. But Daredevil by Bendis is just so impressive to me because it had such big shoes to fill, and it somehow managed to do it and also outgrow them. So that's my list. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I get the feeling that some people won't, but until next time, just make sure that you stay safe and stay mad, all you dogs. Woof woof. See you in the next video.